Welcome to the Building Web3 podcast. Today we're diving into revolutionizing the $217 billion cloud storage market with Patrick from Jackal Protocol. Learn how Jackal Protocol enables secure, decentralized storage solutions for AI, NFTs, social media, and a whole lot more. Remember, nothing stated in this episode is financial advice. Welcome to the Building Web3 podcast. Today we have Patrick. He is the CEO and co-founder of an exciting company, Jackal Protocol. Now, Patrick, could you explain to us what you were doing before you got into Web3 and kind of what was your come to crypto moment?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me. Before I got into crypto, I was working in digital forensics and investigations for law firms and corporations where we would just crack open laptops and do digital footprinting and all that good stuff. Back then, we were working in like the early days of digital forensics on chain, where we were tracking and tracing crypto wallets and flash loan attacks and things along these lines. So that's kind of how my introduction to crypto was actually on the investigation side, which is pretty interesting. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into this.
Yeah, my ex-girlfriend's pretty good at those types of investigations.
Everyone's
unofficial.
Everyone's is for sure. Yeah.
So how did those experiences lead you to, getting started on Jackal Protocol, and like how did those previous experiences shape what you guys are building today?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So back when we were building in digital forensics land, basically, we were looking at blockchain technology for the ability to do an e-discovery tool before court. What does that mean? So when you're doing kind of digital evidence and handling all this digital evidence, you need a way to like track and trace files that were captured and preserved and who touched them on the way to the court bench, basically, right? So when we were doing that, we were thinking, it's like, it sucks that you can't really have a SaaS product where you use a cloud in this environment because there's something called a clean forensic environment, and you can't have a clean forensic environment in the cloud because there's backdoors and things along those lines. So what we're looking at, we're like, okay, so what's a good way that we can kind of track and trace who has access to what files on what time? What else is good at doing track and trace of ledger type activities would be blockchain technology. So our investigations into blockchain technology really helped us find a way to actually move into morphing that technology for a different use case. But instead of track and trace of who has what money at what time, it was who has what evidence at what time, which unlocks all kinds of other possibilities. And that's how we started building Jackal, which is kind of a full-fledged cloud environment at this point.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the overview of it, what's its general mission, and some of the features that are present within Jackal.
Yeah, so first and foremost, it's like the only self-custodial cloud environment right now in the market. What does that mean to be self-custodial? It means that you're the only person that has access to your files. When you use the cloud, a lot of people say it's something like someone else's computer. That's really the truth, but to have the ability to have ownership in a cloud environment, you need blockchains. So when it comes to things like digital privacy and cybersecurity posture, Jackal's unmatched on anything on the market right now. But kind of when you go to market with a blockchain product, you kind of have to start small and then start to grow outwards from there. So we were looking as like, okay, is there like, we built this e-discovery tool. That was cool. It's for a specific use case. They don't really like crypto wallets and things along those lines. So can we take it a step back and find a need for this in the current Web3 environment? That's when we realized that blockchains are good at a lot of things, but they're not good at storage. And this is how we kind of took Jackal and we adapted it to deliver like hard drive-like functionality to other blockchains. And that's kind of the direction that we're going right now is can we deliver this sort of functionality to other blockchains so people can build things like web scale applications. You can think about social, AI, ML. You can think about decentralized science, things where you need to store lots of data, but you still need all the permissions on chain and you still need it to be like blockchain first for smart contract calls type of thing.
So if this is serving other blockchains, let's we always like to do this thing called the life of a transaction. So let's walk through kind of some simple use cases. Let's say, I want to, build a dApp. Would I be trying to integrate it with storage from Jackal Protocol, or like how would it work? Or like, let's walk through some of the core use cases.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to tell a story, and we can take it a few steps back here, right? So let's say I'm building an NFT marketplace on, let's say Polygon, for example, right? When I have an NFT marketplace, one thing is I build the contract and I build the marketplace type functionalities on chain, and that's all awesome. But you hit this point where you need to store all of these JPEGs somewhere, for example, or video content somewhere. That's where you start to get into the situation where I can't actually fit all that content on chain The on-chain part is just like who owns what NFT. It's not the actual file of the NFT. So the file has to live somewhere. So right now, before Jackal existed, you had this environment where option number one is you go to IPFS pinning service, which is like an Amazon server or Microsoft Azure server. I pin my file there, and then that kind of makes it discoverable on the IPFS network, so all the NFTs can link to that. But it kind of introduces a centralized choke point of failure. Forget to pay the AWS bill, and then all the NFTs are gone, like pandemonium ensues, obviously, right? Um, Option number two is if you want truly decentralized storage, you'd have to take your NFT marketplace and you have to move it to like a monolithic storage L1, like a Filecoin or an Arweave, where now you have to like leave your liquidity in your community and all your friends, and now you have to take your NFT marketplace and put it on top of that monolithic L1 because for you to access that storage, you need to build built right on top of it. So we were looking at this where this kind of creates this weird situation where it's a zero sum game fight between the general purpose L1s, like the Polygons and the Optimisms, the Arbitrums, the Archways, and all of these general purpose L1 blockchains, and these storage networks, where they're both fighting for the same developers and users. And we're like, what? Is it possible that we can deliver that functionality to the L1 directly? So now every single L1 has that functionality. So instead of every L1 kind of being like a Filecoin or an Arweave, every L1 would kind of be like a Jackal where it has all these functionalities, simple smart contract call, and you get access to storage on chain instantly, which is pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about how that works in
Yeah.
instance. So we talked about the NFT marketplace is now able to access this storage. If we're launching, let's call it this L2, it's going to be the building Web3 L2. We're launching a new L2,
Okay.
and we're like, hey, what are we doing about storage? And we approach the Jackal network. Talk through how we would go about like integrating with you. Let's say we're like we're like an EVM compatible layer two.
Yeah, so basically, how we do this is pretty much the first time this has ever been really done, where we take Jackal as its own L1 in the Cosmos ecosystem. So we have the
Mm,
sovereign L1 that's built for one use case only, and it's storage. We don't even want people to build on us because we want to deliver the stuff cross chain. So what we did is we took every single blockchain module that we had in our chain and we wrapped it into a smart contract and we deployed that smart contract on another chain. So now you have the smart contract that mimics our chain and does all the things that our chain expects it to do. And then we use something called the IBC, is the inter-blockchain communication protocol, where user says, I want to kind of store this NFT JPEG on, uh, on, on your specific L2. They go to that contract. They say, okay, here's the file. I want to create a storage deal on Jackal. Then that packet gets kind of bundled up, and then the message gets passed all the way to the Jackal protocol, where now our validator set does all the actions on behalf of that user, sends a packet back saying you're all good, and then that file will be sent over HTTPS to a storage decentralized physical infrastructure network, which is
yeah. So let me
that's kind of how that works. Yeah.
let me see if I follow, because this would be the first episode where we talked about any Cosmos related thing. So
Yeah.
congratulations, you are the inaugural Cosmos person. So I have Jax's L2.
Yeah.
He We have a Jackal smart contract that is deployed on our chain, and someone's
Yep.
like, hey, I would love to store this like awesome JPEG of Jack's face, and we make the call. Then the Jackal smart contract is going to be making, what did you call it, an inter blockchain?
Yeah, so we need a way to get that like a message back to our chain, be like, hey, we want this person on this chain to do this job, and the blockchain says, okay, we're going to do all that work and send like a success message back, basically. So we use the inter blockchain
Okay.
communication protocol, but we could also use things like Hyperlane, or we could use like Axelar GMP. It just right now we like IBC because it's natively built in the Cosmos SDK. So any IBC connected chain works, and a company called Union is bringing that to EVM. So
Very
that's what
cool.
we're using right now. Yeah.
Well, for people that are unfamiliar with Cosmos, because I know we haven't talked about it a lot on this, let's talk a little bit about why you guys decided to deploy on Cosmos, kind of like what the benefits of Cosmos are, and like what it allowed you guys to do.
It's a really good question. So when you're building like a DPIN network, and like these things are pretty heavy duty, right? It's you got a lot of things that are going on, and a lot of things have to go right perfectly. When you're building something like an NFT marketplace or a DEX, those things aren't like bad things to build. They're like there's a playbook, they get profitable really quickly, and it's awesome. But when you can kind of compare like the two types of startups, you're looking at like something that's like kind of like more like a Snapchat compared to something that's like a biotech or like a SpaceX deep tech company, right? So when you look at it from that framework and you look at where do I want to build this, right? I want to reduce as much risk as possible because it's already risky to build something that this come with. So when I want to reduce risk, I want to be able to control and have sovereignty over the blockchain itself, the blockchain modules, and the consensus engine. Um, the only place that we could do that right now was the Cosmos SDK. And I would argue like the only place to build a DPIN would be the Cosmos SDK, purely out of the fact that now I don't have to wait for the L1 team to do an upgrade for my app to be successful. And I don't have to sit there waiting for that. And that's like a third party risk that would be added to the equation, in my opinion. So to de risk, we wanted to be able to control the blockchain all the way down to the studs and also have it be built purposefully for a specific application
Mm.
rather than sharing block space with everyone, where it needs to fit all the needs when we don't really care about all the needs. We only care about one specific need.
Absolutely. And do you find that a lot of the other DeepIn projects, like I'm trying to remember where Kosh is built or
Cosmos.
where Cosmos, Hive Mapper, I have no idea where they're at. Maybe they're Cosmos.
Hive Mapper's on Solana, and
Okay.
then you look at Sword Chain, where they're like a vehicle, what's it called when you jam into the actual car and you get the telematics data? I believe it's called. So they're in Cosmos as well, and they're getting an outpost, which is super cool. But Athena, they're doing it's kind of like 5G networks in remote areas. But
Kind of like a
Cosmos is
helium ish.
yeah, kind of like a helium, but it's they're prioritizing like really far out of the way places, where it's a little bit different rather than city centers.
Yeah, and for listeners that are unfamiliar, maybe this is one of the first deep end. We've done other deep end episodes. Of course, go back to the Hive Mapper episode. There was the More episode. There are a few others, but deep end stands for decentralized physical infrastructure networks, I believe, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
and there's also DVIN. People call it like decentralized virtual infrastructure networks, where it's like kind of like more cloud environment. I guess we would categorize as that for
Yeah.
ourselves, but it's it's interesting, right? It's almost like I think a fund wanted to like build like an investment thesis around this idea, so they needed to come up with a name. I
Yeah,
think it's
a
the
fancy
EV3
name.
guys.
Yeah.
Had tip to them where they were able to categorize us, which is awesome.
Yeah, listeners, go back to the Pendle episode if you want to listen to a lot about writing different narratives and essentially how these narratives are created and how they produce really big hype cycles and really interesting results. So it's very interesting because I feel like there's a run up on deep pins earlier this year, and then I feel like deep pins is probably because it's physical infrastructure. It's probably a wave that has yet to really crest and really yet to take over because hardware and it's in the name. It's hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's when you look at just kind of deep in like why hasn't it been like the flavor of the month until recently? It takes a really long time to build these things, right?
Mm.
It's like for us, like we need like 12 things to become like perfectly in sync and working perfectly before we can get just storage to work, right? So we need like the IBC protocol, so we need cross chain, then we need our consensus engine and the custom blockchain modules and the storage network to have like their own software that communicates with the blockchain, and you need all these things to work perfectly. And then you can have like one person uploading a JPEG, right?
A JPEG, yeah.
So just like just the development commitment that you need and the length of time that you need for these to actually come to fruition. I think that's the main reason why like a cache is finally getting like their moment in the sun right now, and they started like what 2018, 2017.
Mm.
It's
Yeah. And for listeners that are unfamiliar, they're like, okay, AWS, Google Cloud, but it's it's decentralized. They might be like, well, we have all these centralized applications. Why does it need to be decentralized?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different answers to that, right? It's about value proposition and the competitive advantages of building on these rails, right? Um, Two things that are really competitive and why deep in like networks are traditionally just like 200x or like 20x cheaper than legacy companies is all the OpEx is automated into the chain, so you don't like need people on accounts and you don't need people on like different things on those lines and all that stuff. And the most important thing is like the capex, so like the capital expenditure. Like we can't afford to spin up like a few $1 billion worth of data centers while still being competitive, right? But by having token incentives and having the ability to bootstrap these networks really quickly, You see success with Hive Mapper or Helium, for example, where they can bootstrap these networks out of nowhere. It gives us the ability to cross like a moat that is kind of set up by these legacy incumbents where like, okay, like I want to compete with AWS or Google. Step one, get a few $1 billion and hop the moat and then just try to build something more competitive. Now that we have the infrastructure bootstrapped and we can cross that moat, you can actually get into like, well, now what are the value propositions and why is this better? A few different ways. In our case, since our permissions are on chain, cybersecurity and privacy posture, there's no one can break into our blockchain like you can kind of break into traditional systems. They kind of do like cybersecurity where they do like perimeter defense, where they like set up like intrusion detection and firewalls and things on that those lines. The software in DeepIn networks is actually hardened to the core, so there's nothing to break into. For you to break into a blockchain, they don't really happen. Any blockchain worth its weight right now hasn't been hacked, where it's actually you have the situation where you have to take over 50% of the nodes or buy up the majority of the tokens. Um, and that's just something that doesn't happen. So from a cybersecurity perspective, it's unmatched and it's not just a theory, like it's been in practice for a long time. That's number one. Number two is sovereignty, right? I don't have to trust a third party. I don't have platform risk. I don't have risk of like backdoors from incumbents. I don't have a lot of stuff from that side of things where now I'm the only person who has access to this cloud environment in our case. Accessibility, where anyone in anywhere in the world, as long as they can access tokens, they can access the platform. You don't need Visa. You don't need any of these payrolls set up for you to actually be able to access something as simple as cloud storage, which is amazing. You can even go into things along the lines of like multi-region geo-distributed nature that auto heals, right? You have this ability that you can have. So let's say every file that gets stored on Jackal gets copied 3 times and like shot out across the world. In the event that one of those files go down, the blockchain actually realizes like, hey, that file is not calling in, therefore that deal is broken. We're going to make a new deal and then auto heal that file from the other forms of redundancy. So you have like whack-a-mole redundancy that just auto heals and geo-distributed multi-region storage, which comparatively it costs you like hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month per terabyte to do that in legacy markets because they're not set up to do that. So a lot of competitive advantages. It's just, are we able to cross the moat by bootstrapping the capex and automating the opex?
Absolutely. And I think one question that will come up for people is they're like, why do we need these cross chain storage capabilities? Like, why doesn't just Solana have its own storage, layer, and each chain have its own storage layer?
Yeah, predominantly because they're focused on a lot of things, right? And
Mhm.
storage is something that like they haven't really prioritized because they're more focused on applications and finance where all the data can fit on chain if it's small enough, right? Once you start getting into things like where we want to go with science or AI, machine learning, you want to get into things like Hive Map or you're collecting all this data, you need somewhere for it to sit and it needs to be able to integrate with the smart contracts locally. Um, that's something that we're only really starting to be in the now, where now we have these ability to build these web scale applications. So they haven't really prioritized it, and they've just settled with just like an AWS, like centralized API spaghetti in the back end, things along those lines, right? So it hasn't been a priority because you're optimizing for things like block times, you're optimizing things like consensus time, you're optimizing for throughput. Storage doesn't make your throughput easier. If anything, it makes it harder. And you look at like all these blockchains have issues with kind of archive nodes and archiving data for transactions because like the validator set like forgets transactions like 14 days ago. So you're kind of in the situation where, okay, we need storage for this to scale. And that's kind of where we come to play. Um, why don't they all have like their own locals? Some of them do, right? But from our perspective and the way that we see distribution and hedging our bets is when we have this model of distribution where we go and deploy these smart contracts, we just automatically inherit all the developers and users on those chains. Now we get to hedge our bets where we actually don't know who's going to win. But we know that whoever does win, we're going to have an outpost on that chain as well, right? So it's a strategy on our end as well.
Yeah. And I think one question that will come up for people is they probably heard the term like data availability and they've seen some solutions come to the market. How would you guys categorize yourself as like a solution? And then like what would be the difference between these like data availability layers.
Yeah, data availability is a fun name because like the data is not actually available. So what they do essentially is like they have proofs that the data did exist at a certain time. So they're able to give like very binary, like yes, no answers to like, did this transaction happen? The availability layer says, yes, it did happen. Awesome. But like if you're looking to store like a full on like terabyte of data, and then you need it to be available in the sense that I want to download it and I want to have it back and I want to look through it. That's not something that they do.
Mm,
So what we focus on is actually the ability to store really large files and have like a hot storage network so people can pull that down. In theory, Jackal can do data availability in the sense that you could like run like you could kind of like put state on the Jackal and like have these rollups that kind of use Jackal as kind of like an archive node slash data availability layer, but we kind of more prioritize storing large files like CCTV camera footage or like video footage or NFTs or chain state or archiving data, things along those lines.
yeah, that makes complete sense. So let's talk a little bit about some of the people that are already using your product, and like what are kind of the use cases? Is it like a decentralized social media like a Farcaster? Is it if I want to have a decentralized backup of all the Building Web3 podcasts episodes, I'd use it. We'll talk about who's using this and when you can, of course.
Yeah, so what we're focusing on right now is like Web3 native use cases. So things like Bitsong, things like SwordChain, kind of getting over to a cache and delivering storage to their compute environments, which is interesting, or going to Stargaze for their NFTs and delivering storage for their NFTs, or even just deploying onto general purpose L1s and kind of giving the picks and shovels for developers to build web scale applications. Our first outpost is going to be going live pretty soon on Archway, which is another Cosmos based blockchain. And that's kind of like where our first outpost is going to be. But in the realm of Web3, people who use Jackal are individuals that just want just blockchain native and the ability for it to integrate with their smart contracts directly. Or if you want storage paid for by transaction fees, or if you want like when you go to mint an NFT collection, instead of sending them away to like a third party service where you have to upload the files, pin the IPFS, and then come back with IPFS IDs. Um, what we're able to do is actually just like inherently build that into their functionality of their smart contract directly. So that is like the value proposition for Web3 is all the traditional blockchain ethos of sovereignty, decentralization, on-chain, things along those lines. When we look at value propositions for Web2 businesses, this is something that we work with a lot as well. We're working with a telecom company in Iowa to back up all their user data. Their value proposition isn't really like wallets or crypto or self custody. What they want is multi region geo distributed storage that's like 200% cheaper. That's their value proposition, and they like that as well. So it really depends on who's buying and what they see as their specific needs as well. And then we have about like 1,000 individual users that kind of use it like a Dropbox, basically for privacy and security type individuals.
Let's talk about why it's cheaper, because to me it seems very and I think most people would assume like, oh, decentralized is just going to be by nature more expensive because you have all these different computers, where in the past you had like one centralized computer. Talk about why things are like end up being cheaper in like deep inland.
You have pricing power in the sense that for two reasons, right? So if you have no operating expenses other than like just software development and everything's automated into the chain, you don't have to have to upcharge for things like that. The other thing is that we actually don't run any servers. The blockchain does it just inherently bootstraps all these validators and storage providers. And when we do kind of, if we need storage, we start calling up data centers, say, hey, all those idle servers that you have collecting dust, like, have you plugged them in the Jackal protocol? And you'll earn cryptocurrency. And in the event that you want them, you unplug them, and then the blockchain will realize and distribute those files away. So you have this ability to use underutilized resources that are around but aren't being utilized at all. So you kind of have an incentive for that to be plugged in.
This raises a question I hadn't even thought I'd ask, but it's very interesting. So we talk about we're storing files on, let's say, like an idle data center, and then this data center comes online. It's Christmas time, and people are about to shop at Amazon. Amazon's spinning up a bunch of servers. So what happens to those files when it's like, hey, we actually need these, and we can no longer lend them to Jackal?
Yeah, so the way that we have something called the internal detection of loss and proof of persistence protocol. So every 12 hours, all the servers in the entire Jackal protocol call in a specific file. So one file of like the thousands, hundreds of thousands of files that we have, it gets proved that it is still on the network with 3 times redundancy on different IP addresses. So every 12 hours, all the storage providers call in and say, "Yep, we still have the file. Here's like an encrypted 1 kilobyte chunk to prove that that exists." In the event that that data center says, "Hey, I kind of need these servers back. I don't want to rent them to Jackal anymore," and they unplug from the wall, we have like a respectful shutdown and storage providers post collateral so that they can like slowly offload their files. But in the event that they don't do that, what happens is the blockchain says, "Whoa, we only have 2 forms of redundancy for this one file. We're supposed to have 3 forms of redundancy. We're going to send out another storage deal where all the other providers on the network can grab that and then actually copy from the other 2 forms of redundancy, so it auto heals in that nature." So as long as there's like our utilization ratio is only like at 19% of like the storage used versus storage provided. So in the event that as long as we're still able to host all that data, then all those files will auto heal to servers that have capacity.
And let's talk a little bit about how these like, you know, excess servers, people that have things like they want to plug into the Jackal network, and how are they kind of rewarded for being a storage provider?
Yeah, so we have 2 things, right? So we started in the early days of the Jackal protocol. It was like gold rush, where it was purely inflation based because we were bootstrapping our network to have enough data because you need to bootstrap the supply side and then you have to go get the demand side after that. Once you bootstrap the network, we did an economics upgrade that went to chain. And that's the cool thing about the Cosmos ecosystem is everyone votes on proposals and everyone has different incentives. So there was a proposal for us to move from like more of like a bootstrapping growth phase into a more sustainable kind of a more sustainable phase after that. That phase kind of went into more of a real yield inflation hybrid where storage providers are paid based. So if I have a file, I go and buy a terabyte, right? So if I buy a terabyte, that actually means I'm buying 3 terabytes on the Jackal protocol because it has 3 times redundancy. I pay my $8 a month for that. And then the actual payment gets drip fed to the storage providers over the duration of my payment cycle, depending on who has those files. So if you have a file stored, you're getting paid that $8 a month per terabyte to that storage provider. In the event that so that's like the first thing is the real yield. The other thing that we wanted to do is to make sure that we don't have like a shock. We also have kind of like a universal basic income for our storage providers as well, where we have like a little bit of inflation, kind of like we have a storage stipend determined by how much storage they provide to the network. They get paid like a universal basic income to make sure that they stay on the network as well. In the event that like all the storage deals died all of a sudden, people didn't renew, we need to make sure that we still have capacity.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about, what kind of, upcoming milestones you guys have and like what kind of developments your community can start to look forward to as you guys continue to expand.
Yeah, right now we're looking at V4 upgrades. So we have a huge upgrade we've been working on it since October. So this is like probably our largest upgrade to date. This is going to be going live. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it'll be on chain by the end of the week, which is pretty exciting. A little nerve wracking internally. We're trying to make our deadlines, but that's the big one where we kind of it's just like a bunch of quality of life improvements. Plus, like we now have native IPFS support, so um, all the files stored in the Jackal protocol can like be retrieved from the IPFS CDN, which is that's pretty exciting. When like speeds start to pick up a lot from that. Other quality of life things where like you sign your storage deals before you sign your storage deal and then the file gets sent to the network. Previously, you'd have to like wait for your file to upload, and then before like the block time timed out, then you had to like approve the transaction, and then like the transactions time out. I think it's like 60 seconds, so you'd be waiting there for a full terabyte to upload to the network, and then it happens after like whatever amount of time it takes for that to happen, and then you have to like click right away, and if you miss it, you have to do it all over again. So that kind of sucked.
Man,
So just a bunch of quality of life improvements, and then the econ V2 model is going live, where now we have this real yield framework, and we have the storage stipend. Things like where you have like affiliate, where you can like actually give another person your wallet address or your RNS name. Like we have name service built into the protocol. You can plug that in when you go to buy storage, and you can get paid out 20% of like the total storage that's paid for. Um,
absolutely.
and Yeah, so a bunch of stuff like that. And then our first outpost is going on Archway, which we're super
Yeah.
excited about. So it's the first time people can access it that way.
And how do you kind of envision Jackal contributing to the broader adoption of Web3 technologies? It's, people are building apps and they're like, hey, I need some kind of storage solution, and you guys to be the go-to.
Yeah, that's the goal. Is we want every single developer on every blockchain to be able to access scalable storage with the smart contract call, and just having it hyper local, natively built into their applications, making their lives a lot easier. So they don't have to kind of like balance all these accounts on the back end and make sure all the visas are paid off or not expiring, and things along those lines, where you have something that's sovereign, it's ridiculously secure, you have full redundancy controls, and it's natively on chain, giving the picks and shovels for us to actually build the web scale applications that we all want. You can look back at the previous cycles, everyone is rushing for product market fit. And then the actual like cryptography, like the boring cryptography work and the boring infrastructure work wasn't really there to support the applications and like the visions that a lot of the founders had. So we're looking to just shore up one piece of the stack, being storage, and making sure that they have they can build what they want to build.
Absolutely. And what would you say, like, because you're, a building Web3 founder, we have many, founders already in the audience and people that are aspiring to be founders. What would you say are some of the more difficult aspects of, building in this Web3 space? Do you find it to be, marketing? You have a solution, but you need to tell people about it. Is it fundraising, like getting money behind it? Is it community engagement? You're like, ah, crap, I launched a token and now I need to make sure there's no mutiny.
Um, I would say the big thing, there's two big things, right? Is don't die in the bear markets. That's probably rule number one, because if you die, then your product can't make it. So making sure that you keep all the controls and you run a tight ship. The second thing is understanding the trade-offs that you make, right? You if you want to optimize for the best tech stack, optimize for the best tech stack, but you're not getting the most liquidity, and understand that going in. The same works the other way around, right? So really identifying your trade-offs, making sure that you do your pros and cons and do your homework before kind of diving into a specific ecosystem, or diving into a specific kind of consensus engine or SDK, and understanding your trade-offs and making the right decision for you.
Absolutely. So finally, like, there's some cool milestones and cool, life improvements that are coming to the Jackal network. Where can people like learn more about you, learn more about Jackal Protocol, and get involved with the project?
Yeah, for us, best place is Twitter. We're pretty active on Twitter, so at Jackal underscore protocol is where you're going to find all of our stuff. Also, our website, jackalprotocol.com. And if you want to chat with us, if you think that this might be a good fit for your solution or an app you're building, or you're just trying to have ridiculously secure cloud storage as an individual, we're really active in our Telegram and Discord communities. So just ping us there, and we'll be at your service.
Absolutely. Perfect. Well, I'll put all the links in the description. Patrick, again, thank you so much for coming on here. And to all the listeners, let's get back to building Web3.